American Axes, a survey of their development and their makers by Henry J. Kaufman. There's a dedication here. It says, for Myra and James Kyler, both of whom love old objects made of iron, particularly axes. Here's the table of contents. Looks like the book is 149 pages long. It covers early European axes. It covers the 18th century, the 19th century, the 20th century, and in the 20th century it has some sub-chapters here, one being the portfolio of collector axes, care of the axe and use of the axe. Then it has another chapter here, the Directory of American Axe Makers. This is from the introduction. Any comprehensive study of the history of woodworking tools must of necessity begin with the axe. It was not only the first, but for many years about the only woodworking tool of any kind, and it was still important right up to the end of the Middle Ages. At the present time, and this being 1966 that this was written in, it is still used a great deal for its original purpose, the felling and preparation of timber, and it occupies a modest but useful place in the modern carpenter's kit. The book starts out with the chapter, Early European Axes. Got some illustrations of some extremely old axes. Illustration of some different axes and when they were used. Some photographs. Here's the chapter, the 18th century. I'll read a little bit from the first page of that chapter. In the earliest settlements, the blacksmith was undoubtedly the most important craftsman. It is known that several were among the first group who came to Jamestown, and they were probably of equal importance in the early settlements in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. So necessary was this tradesman that when a town was laid out, a lot near the center was designated as the site for the blacksmith shop and given free to a smith who would build a shop there and carry on the trade for a prescribed number of years. Of course, much time was spent in ways other than making axes or laying a new piece of steel on the edge of an old one, but these were certainly some of the most essential of the tasks he performed. Here's an illustration of the steps in making an American felling axe. Here's some information about the steps in making a goose wing axe. Chapter 3, the 19th century, starts out like this. All students of technology know that the styles and techniques of the 18th century in America were continuations of earlier European practices. The many innovations of the Industrial Revolution caused more axes to be produced, and in most cases they were better. Yet, despite the emphasis on the factory methods, axes continued to be made by hand in remote sections of the country, in small establishments far into the 19th century, and in rare cases into the 20th century. There's a drawing of the Collins and Company. Information about different patterns. Here's the grinding shop at the Collins Company. a letter to the workmen at one of the, looks like the Man Company. Here's some information about smaller blacksmith shops. Here are some patterns of some axes. Here's the chapter on the 20th century. It starts out, it might be thought that the 20th century would be the least interesting of all periods in which axes have been made in America. If one assumes that in this century axe making has become a highly mechanized industry, but such an assumption, as will be shown, would be incorrect. Here's a portfolio of collector axes. Here's a trade axe. Looks like some goose wing axes, some broad axes, some more broad axes, here's a Black Raven axe head, a felling axe made by the Kelly Company. Here's a perfect axe made by the Kelly Company. There's a more photos of axes. There's a fro, some specialty axes. Here's a chapter on the care of the axe. The use of an axe. There's how to hewn a log. And this is the chapter that I found of interest, especially to anybody who might be collecting axes, is a directory of American axe makers. In that directory, it lists, oh gosh, it's got to be hundreds of axe making companies. They're all alphabetically listed, and when they were producing axes. Has some photographs, more illustrations. Book finishes up with a glossary of terms, all sorts of terms that are used with axes. You may find this book of interest if you're a axe collector or an axe user. American Axes by Henry J. Kaufman.